I think it's a marginal outcome. It's nowhere near what Trump and his secretaries had sort of projected or wanted. It's nowhere in keeping with Trump's claim that he can end the war in 24 hours. But then it's not surprising either. As far as diplomacy is concerned, I think the Russians have stolen a clear march over the Americans.
Russia has stolen a clear march over the Americans. You're putting it as boldly and bluntly as that.
Yes.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. Today we focus on last night's 2-hour-long Putin-Trump telephone conversation. Is its outcome significant and meaningful, or has Putin played for time and perhaps got the better of his American counterpart? And where does this leave Donald Trump? He claimed he could end the Ukraine war in 24 hours, but now he can't even get Russia to agree to a full-fledged ceasefire. Joining me for today's discussion is India's former ambassador to the United States and former High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, Navtej Sarna. Mr. Sarna was ambassador in Washington during the first Trump presidency. Mr. Sarna, how significant or insignificant is the outcome of the Putin-Trump talks? All that Putin has agreed to is a 30-day halt of attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. That's nowhere near the full and unconditional ceasefire Trump was looking for when Marco Rubio said the ball is in Russia's court. So how meaningful is this outcome?
Well, thank you, Karan. I think it's a marginal outcome. It's nowhere near what Trump and his secretaries had sort of projected or wanted. It's nowhere in keeping with Trump's claim that he can end the war in 24 hours. But then it's not surprising either. Because to expect that such a complicated set of circumstances would be changed with one telephone call, that a person like Vladimir Putin would quickly agree to whatever President Trump said simply because he was calling him up, I think that was unrealistic to begin with. It is a marginal beginning of a process. Whether it even carries on is still in doubt. How it carries on, of course, we have to see, because, as you said, Putin has put in various conditions. He's basically stated the entire Russian position in the readout of that conversation. So it's not going to be easy. And yes, to some extent, although he would not like to project that, he has played Trump.
Let's take up on that point you made, that Putin has introduced new conditions. On top of all his earlier ones about how a ceasefire is to be monitored, he now wants foreign military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine to end. He says Ukraine should not be allowed to rearm and mobilize. Many of those are conditions that will be unacceptable to Europe. Don't they look as if they are serious stumbling blocks, as if he's thrown a spanner into the works?
Well, clearly, these are not really new conditions. They are the fundamental spelling out of Russia's actual position. If you see Putin's position, he doesn't believe there should be a Ukraine as a separate sovereign entity. So everything else follows from that. That there should be no European assistance, there should be no mobilization, there should be no sharing of intelligence, and so on and so forth. The fact remains that Europe today, in Trump's view, doesn't matter. Europe has been left to scramble and do their own thing, and they may have to pick up the pieces if there is such a ceasefire. If there is, who's going to maintain it? Who's going to control it? Who is going to make sure that neither side breaks it? Trump has already made it clear that Ukraine is not going to be part of NATO, that American forces are not going to be on the ground there. So he's actually talking over the heads of Europe and Ukraine. And this is one of the more disturbing aspects of this conversation.
Except that when Putin insists that Ukraine should not be given foreign military aid, there should be no intelligence sharing with Ukraine, it should not be allowed to rearm and mobilize, those are conditions that presumably even Trump would find difficult to accept because they undermine Ukraine's sovereignty.
Well, I don't think Trump has really countered those conditions. He doesn't seem to have contradicted those conditions either in his conversation or in the readout that is coming out of the White House. He is still trying to project it as a very positive conversation. And what has actually happened is that besides all this stuff on Ukraine, what Putin and the Russians actually are gleeful about is that this has given them an opportunity to come back to the big table. And
Absolutely.
yeah,
I'll come to that in a moment's time, but let me first pick up on what you said that Trump hasn't even mentioned the points raised by Putin in the American readout. Do you believe Trump was able to, or did he even try to, put pressure on Putin? Certainly, there was no dressing down of the sort handed out to Zelensky 2 or 3 weeks ago. Yet it's clear that for at least a week, Putin has been stalling and getting away with it. But Trump didn't roar back. If anything, it seems as if he's purred gently.
you see, Putin is not going to burn his best asset. His best asset is Trump. So he's given him just enough to project it as a victory. And he said, yes, we'll do a ceasefire on energy infrastructure. And the Americans say it's going to be a ceasefire on energy and infrastructure, which are two very different things. And even this is not actually a gift to the Americans because even the Ukrainians have been attacking Russia's oil infrastructure, which is part of their energy infrastructure. But Putin has projected it in just that much to give Trump something. He doesn't want to humiliate Trump. He doesn't want to let the world say that he played Trump. He needs Trump to bring him back into all sorts of legitimacy, all sorts of equality. And therefore, I don't think that Trump would have countered any of these. We don't have an exact transcript of the conversation, but I think they wouldn't have done it. I mean, they were talking about ice hockey.
Absolutely. In fact, let's take that point up. As you suggested a moment ago, there is a developing view, particularly in the Western media, that Putin played for time and succeeded. He's given very little, and for all intents and purposes, the fighting in Ukraine will continue. On the other hand, as you pointed out yourself, Trump has brought Putin in from the cold. He's no longer the pariah that he was seen to be. In fact, as you pointed out, Trump has even agreed to resume ice hockey matches with Russia. Sarah Rainsford of the BBC, in her comment, says this is a disappointing day for US diplomacy, but a good one for the Kremlin. Would you agree?
Absolutely, because just a simple reading of the two readouts shows that the Russians are coming from a very professional standpoint, from a very organized standpoint. They are projecting things in after having studied them, knowing their short-term and long-term interests. Americans, and essentially, I do not think this is professional American diplomacy. I think it is the White House projecting a Trumpian view, a Trumpian agenda. You can see the distinction between two. As far as diplomacy is concerned, I think the Russians have stolen a clear march over the Americans.
Russia has stolen a clear march over the Americans. You're putting it as boldly and bluntly as that.
Yes.
Let's then focus for a moment on what this means for Trump. After all his bluster that he can end the Ukraine war in 24 hours, Trump has very little to deliver and show for it. Will this affect his stature and image? Is it a setback, a dent on his performance?
Well, again, it depends, Karan, on who you're talking to and which part of America is making statements on it. Those who follow him can see no wrong in him. But there are views in America where there is a pushback. You would have seen the Time News, Time cover, etc., which is really calling him all sorts of names. So I think this will this will stress the fact that you do not have a magic wand for the world's problems. He said he would finish the Gaza problem. In fact, overnight, the Gaza problem, with evidently, according to the Israelis, with American agreement, has really gone over the line. The 400 people have been killed in one day's strikes, and how are we going to recover from that and the destroying of that ceasefire? And I don't think there's much to say at the moment that Trump is really going to be the peacemaker of the century.
But this is the first serious setback he suffered, isn't it? Up till now, he's more or less had his way either in actual fact or presentationally. But suddenly, instead of pushing Putin, he's been pushed back himself.
Well, I think he would have known that, but he has achieved what he wanted. What he wanted was that he and Putin should be talking. He was always very keen to talk to Putin, and that his people have worked towards a possible ceasefire. I mean, his envoy to the Middle East, ironically, who's actually talking to Putin, Steve Witkoff, said that Putin is philosophically in agreement for a ceasefire. What that means, I have no idea. But they are looking at these aspects and projecting the deal making talents of the president as the ultimate victory, and as the one element which has changed what was happening in Biden's time. Because again and again, including in the readout, it said this is a war which should never have started. And he doesn't blame the Russians for starting the war. It basically is saying, if I was president, this wouldn't have happened. And therefore, he's blaming his own people.
It's not just that he's blaming his own people. There is a sense in which he's deceiving himself, or maybe even in denial. The BBC, just to take that as an example, but I'm sure this opinion has been held by most of the Western press, believes that the outcome is a retreat in the US position from where it stood just a week ago. Trump, on the other hand, as you quoted yourself, has called it very good and productive. Doesn't it feel as if he's either deceiving himself or he's in denial?
Well, there is an element of denial, Karan, because they've retreated from two principles. One is that the Americans and Europe should work together on the Ukrainian conflict with Russia. That has gone out of the window. The second issue is that the conflict is between Russia and Ukraine is not a negotiator. So it's very difficult for a third person to be negotiating on somebody's behalf and protecting that person's interests in full measure. So that in those two points, they certainly have retreated from what the American position was, say, under Biden and before Trump started this negotiations. Actually, they retreated the minute Pete Hegseth went and made those statements on Ukraine that there will be no American forces. And
Mr. Sarna, it's not just that they've retreated from the position that Biden was taking, because Biden's is an earlier and different presidency. They've also retreated from the position that they established in Jeddah when they were talking to Ukraine and announced that they'd got a full-fledged agreement for a ceasefire. Marco Rubio publicly said the ball is now in Russia's court. Russia's kicked it straight back.
Absolutely. I think it seems, if you read all this, that they're actually talking about two different ceasefires. The one that Marco Rubio talked about, and which they made the Ukrainians agree to, which is a full ceasefire, even for a limited number of days. And the one that now has come out of the Putin conversation, which is a ceasefire at best on energy infrastructure. And this has got nothing to do with the full ceasefire. So yes, there is a distinct retreat from even the Jeddah position.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Now, immediate talks towards obtaining a comprehensive ceasefire will start in Saudi Arabia. After this outcome, and given what we know of Putin's response, can those immediate talks succeed? Clearly, yesterday did not. Is there any hope for the future?
Well, I think they've agreed to have technical talks on the other side, other situation like the maritime security and so on and so forth. But again, you have to read that with all the conditions that have been put into the Russian readout. And therefore, those conditions will come into play once those negotiations start. At every stage, I would believe Putin will string Trump along. He will just give him just that much to be able to go on. We will buy time, he will stall for time, and he will try to entrench the Russian position as much as possible in the time that he gets.
Let me repeat your words. Putin will string Trump along. He will play for time and stall for time. And clearly, Trump will have been strung. Won't this diminish Trump vis-a-vis Putin?
Well, that's what the world will think. But Trump himself will keep on projecting him to the contrary. He will keep on saying that this is the only way out for peace. This is the only way out to end war. And frankly, he is not particularly worried as to which part of the territory goes to the Russians. And therefore, he will be all the time ready to have that essential compromise, which will make him come as the deal maker of all time.
Or at least look like or be able to present himself as if he were the deal maker.
To present himself as that, because that's the image that he wants to project. That's the image that he is pushing.
So image is more important to Trump than reality?
Well, certainly more important than Ukrainian interests.
Let me end with one last question. The bottom line that we're all hoping that we can work towards is actually a genuine, full-fledged ceasefire. That is also what Trump claims he's working towards, even if he's not achieving it. The truth is that with the military momentum in his favor, why would Putin agree to an early ceasefire? With every day that the war continues, he's getting back whatever he lost at Kursk. He claims he's got it all back. In fact, he's advancing along the rest of the front line, slowly but steadily. So why would he want an early ceasefire when the advantage is on his side?
Well, at the moment, things which could have made the Russians move towards a genuine ceasefire have been actually taken out of the negotiations. If you were going to put full pressure along with all your allies, if you're going to really work on the sanctions, if you're going to come across as a very united force on the other side with NATO, then, Putin had cause to worry. For the moment, all those cards have been handed over to Putin. So you're absolutely right. At the moment, there's nothing to push him to make any serious compromise.
My last question. As you said, in the eyes of the world, Putin will have got the better of Trump. Will this mean that the way Trump is perceived by heads of government, be it in Europe, be it in Asia, be it in Africa, will alter and change to Trump's possible disadvantage?
I think the heads of government and heads of state all over the world actually have already made their own assessments about President Trump. They have also made their own assessments on how best to handle him, how best to work around him, and how best to make sure that he doesn't see them on the radar screen as a target. So I think they will continue to do what they're already doing.
But the scales, in a sense, have fallen from their eyes. Some of the fear, some of the concern will have diminished because they've suddenly seen he can't deliver.
Well, I think countries have already made their own assessments, and they are not going to be obviously chancelleries all around the world will be studying the two readouts and making their assessments on what's going to happen in the future, what's going to happen in the coming days, what's going to happen on the Ukraine conflict. But I think in bilateral terms, every country will deal with America given its own interests, given its own focus, and they will deal with the Trump administration as they have to.
Mr. Sarna, thank you very much for the time you've given me. Take care. Stay safe.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.